I never imagined I would be the one to recount this tale. While some things are easier to forget than others, there are some that stick with you. Some memories are ingrained in your flesh to the point where they will remain even after all this time has passed. Listening to my story isn't going to be a picnic. Do not claim ignorance if you decide to listen. This narrative deals with serious subjects, so I should probably warn you about that before I start. Trust, infidelity, and family dynamics are the main topics covered. You may wish to pause the recording at this point if you find these subjects upsetting. A house full with restrictions was my birthplace. Discipline, according to my father Darian Vale, was the Piceris eloquentia for all problems. His speech was concise and forceful, and he expected complete submission from his subjects. At 7 o'clock, you would have sat down to supper if he had said so. The door was locked at 9:01 if he instructed you to be home by 9 o'clock. Absolutely not. I don't understand. The woman who raised me, Alira Thorne, was unique. Distant, not gentler. It seemed as if her reality was completely different from ours. She was constantly busy but never really there as she walked ghostly about the house. Her answer would be devoid of any eye contact if I were to pose a question to her. As if she were unsure of how to soothe me, her arms were rigid. The authoritative figure was my father. Silence was my mother's voice. Our family was cold and distant. If there was love, it remained silent. There were no stories to read before bed, no pancakes on Sunday, and no spontaneous extended hugs. Emotions made people feel awkward, which is something I picked up early on. Seeing me cry enraged my father. Her energy was sapped by all the excitement. I figured out that it was best to keep things inside. Up until I was an adult, I had no idea how much of an impact that had on who I am. From a young age, I yearned for this intangible thing. Is it love? Is it validation? It could be as simple as simply feeling wanted. However, it becomes difficult to identify love as an adult if it is not taught during childhood. Paying attention is not the same as caring. Security is what you think control is. You confuse physical attraction with a more profound feeling. I felt like I'd never really mastered the language of relationships by the time I reached my 20s. I had dated a few individuals before, but there was always that one thing that felt turned off. I felt like I was clueless since I didn't know something that everyone else did. Authentic self-assurance has always eluded me. I started to question my sanity and think maybe I was flawed. Perhaps personal relationships aren't my strong suit. Perhaps I simply hadn't mastered the proper technique. Cale Duskwood came next. He stood out. Nice, patient, and attentive while I spoke. For some reason, he had a way of putting me at ease. Yet, security did not eliminate fear. My body still tensed up whenever things got physical, though. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. You are inadequate. I yearned for improvement. With him. In my own name. Because of this, I resorted to using a screen as my primary means of seeking answers. In the stillness of the night, I sought for videos, lessons, and anything else that would fill the knowledge gap I thought I had. Curiosity wasn't the only thing. It was a state of despair. It was my desire to gain knowledge. I aspired to excel at something that had consistently eroded my self-esteem. I yearned for an end to the constant sense of failure. However, I was unprepared to be apprehended. If you're still here, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to my channel, leave a comment with your opinions, and like this video. I can assure you there is a great deal more to discover. Quietness filled the home. That profound stillness that makes you feel as if you're the sole survivor on this planet. The way it was, I liked it. It simplified matters. It allowed me to be myself without worrying about judgment or answering things I didn't understand. For more than an hour, I remained confined to my room, with my laptop perched on my thighs and the screen pouring a gentle light into my flesh. The entrance was locked. The volume was not high. To be sure nobody was home, I had checked at least 3 times. No harm has come to me. That is, until I realized I wasn't. For amusement, I wasn't watching. There was no element of interest here. For some reason, I kept telling myself that this was research. Things like relationships and intimacy, which seemed to come naturally to other people, were beyond my skill set. For far too long, I had questioned my actions and wondered whether I should have felt a different way. Furthermore, I had had enough of always doubting my own worth. Thus, I observed. I read widely. I listened intently to each step, gesture, and hushed command. I yearned for improvement. As for Sarah Saloan, in my own name, I just wanted to pretend for a change that I was competent. Next, something occurred. Someone is knocking. A groan, signs of movement. My dad's voice, too. "Hey there, Sarah Saloan." The terror, which came on slowly but surely and sent shivers down my spine, took a moment to sink in. As I squirmed around the keyboard, I desperately tried to shut the window, but by the time I am Sarah's elowinged, it was already open. There was damage. My breath was caught in my throat as I spun around. Indeed, he was present. Darian Vale, the man I call Dad, observing the entrance, peering down at my performance. There was a blip in the timeline. Every passing second seems endless. I was speechless. Stayed still. I was unprepared for the wrath, contempt, and lecturing that would make me regret my birth. But it never materialized. On the contrary, my dad remained still, watching me. According to him, who seemed surprisingly composed, he had no idea he would stumble into this. He was too much for me to bear. My gut clenched into knots, and my face sweltered. I felt exposed and ashamed, like a little kid caught in the act of an unforgivable sin. He stepped inside. As if there weren't already enough of a physical distance between us, I leaned my back against the headboard. According to him, you're not in danger. However, I must own that I am taken aback. I wished I could vanish, to collapse onto the bed and forget about this whole thing. I was unable to do it, though. I sensed a heavy, thick air between us, laden with an unnamed substance. Squeezing out a word, "I thought you weren't home," was all I could muster. He blew his nose to let out his breath. I was wrong. Just returned. His eyes landed on the computer, before turning to face me again. "So, do you wish to elucidate the subject of that?" Then I swiftly shook my head. "I don't care." Nothing more than that. Seemed more than nothing. I clenched my jaw and held onto the blanket under my head as if it could steady me. It stung like hell because my heart was racing. Sarah Saloan. Looking up was something I had to do. He exhibited no anger, nor was he irritated. Regardless, he gazed inquisitively. And that was worse in a way. He asked why it wasn't enough to just ask for information on such matters. I squinted, asked, was it really that easy? I chuckled dryly, without any mirth. I didn't know who to ask. A reliable individual. Sucking hard, I choked. Have faith in? I couldn't quite put the word into words. Almost like a concept whose exact definition eludes me. The words wouldn't come out of my mouth until I paused, and then I choked. I've never been good at this. Regarding interpersonal connections, I am competent in my work. Plus, I would like not to be. I merely wished to comprehend. As if contemplating my remarks, he gently nodded in agreement. His elbows rested on his knees as he leaned forward ever so slightly. And? Was anything new taught to you? Shakily, I let out an exhalation. It is insufficient. Quietness ensued. A hush so thick that it felt like a brick was pushing down on my heart. This time, his voice was gentler. Maybe I can be of assistance. Something shifted in the room. Perhaps I was the only one. Perhaps it was his expressionless face and easy posture that gave the impression that this was quite normal to him. However, it was peculiar. It wasn't right. Still, I remained motionless. With one arm resting on the headboard and his fingers carelessly drumming on the wood, my father leaned back ever so slightly. As if we were talking about a school assignment, his voice remained steady and composed. Things that men like are subjective, he remarked slowly. Things that aren't necessarily amenable to digital instruction. My stomach knotted up. Fists formed in my lap as I knelt down. Evidently, he was putting me through my paces. Observing my reaction, my mistake was not laughing it off. I shifted the focus. I would have gotten up and left the room if it meant ending our relationship, but that was not the case for me. Just couldn't. I sat there, waiting for him to return it. I don't understand what kept me from doing that. I guess it was astonishment. Perhaps something else was at play. Before I could stop myself, I heard myself talking. "You really believe you could instruct me?" He maintained a fixed stare. Even now, he taps his fingers idly on the headboard. According to him, one's own life experiences are the greatest educators. There were cramps in my gut. Clumps formed on my palms. I felt squished by the walls, overheated, and cramped in this tiny room. He lowered his voice and leaned forward ever so slightly. "Let me demonstrate." My heart skipped a beat. Yes, I should have declined. The discussion should have come to a close. I ought to have chuckled, but that was not the case for me. Everything shifted at that same instant. Distinct change had taken place in the atmosphere between us. Piqued curiosity. In the stillness, the weight of unspoken words increased with each passing second. His expression was unintelligible, and his comfortable posture exacerbated the tension in the room. I desired to relocate. I needed someone to move, someone to look away, or someone to do anything that would break the spell that had taken over the room. But that was not the case for me. Even though my mind and pulse were racing, I remained motionless, because I had an innate feeling that I should be asking questions about which I was unsure I wanted to know the answers. "The greatest teacher," he had remarked, "is experience." At this point, the phrases continued to reverberate in my mind, morphing into an incomprehensible whole. With a heavy swallow, I emceras elowinged to utter a hushed murmur. "Please explain." His demeanor remained composed as he delicately tapped his fingertips against the headboard. Listening to an expert can be a great help at times. My throat tightened. I was confused as to whether it was due to anxiety or something else entirely. My breath was trembling. "The way this feels, weird." He didn't look away. "Why?" A shiver went down my back as I heard the question. "Since the reason shouldn't require an expliceris eloentium. I ought to have vacated the room earlier." I was unprepared to face what my continued presence meant. I tried to laugh, but it was insincere. "To be honest, I am confused." "I mean, it does." His head was slightly inclined. "Feeling anxious is unnecessary." I uttered the word not too hastily. It was untrue, though. Feeling anxious was just normal. This is about the discussion, this is about me, and this is about how the walls were closing in. That was my protest. "It seems like this isn't going to work." Something happened on his face, but it was too fast for me to describe. Later on, though, he relaxed, his hands casually lying in his lap. "Okay," he replied plainly. There was no force from him. Avoided a debate. Even worse, that didn't help in any way. Back then, I had no idea what I know today. The fact that my dad was wounded as well. The spirits of his own dead relatives. That something within him had begun to crumble long before I was born. Looking at my mom with the same intense gaze he used on me, as if he were trying to decipher an unspoken message, is a scene I can vividly picture from his younger years. Alira Thorne had an exquisite beauty. It wasn't the kind that would make people gawk in a crowded place, but it was the kind that would make you gaze at her when she wasn't looking. The air around her betrayed a woman who had seen it all and was no longer interested in being amazed. A time my dad had feelings for her. Indeed, I am aware of that. Surely they had happier times in the past. Remember when they were laughing so hard that it echoed throughout the house, when he could not resist the need to touch her waist in the kitchen, and her eyes met his and softened. However, love, like milk left out in the sun, spoils if not nurtured. When I was old enough to pay attention, the only things separating them were duty and physical separation. At the age of 6, I recall standing in the hallway and observing them silently seated across from one another at the dinner table. They might have argued all they wanted, but the stillness between them spoke volumes. My mother no longer waited for him to return home at night when I was 10 years old. I didn't understand they weren't actually married anymore until I was 15 years old. Not in a meaningful way. I pondered whether I reminded my father of her as I sat on my bed, and he stared at me as if I were an awkward conversation partner. If that's the reason the air seemed so dense. His voice seemed almost frantic if that was the reason. I don't know how long my dad had been in the water. Perhaps he was merely seeking a foundation upon which to build. In an effort to shrink, I drew my knees up and wrapped my arms about them. My mind was overloaded. I was thinking too quickly. This man was my dad. It was this man who had brought me up, shown me the ropes of bicycling, and cautioned me against putting too much faith in others. Then why was this experience different? Something has to be said. Just about anything. Am I mistaken? Now I've spoken up. I doubt he even heard me because my voice was so low. After a while, he finally spoke. Finally, it's dependent. I scowled. About what? His breath came out slowly, as if he were giving serious consideration to what to say next. Regarding your feelings towards it. There was something about the response that gave me the willies. I felt as if someone had offered me a loaded gun and was asking if I wanted to fire it. The discussion should have come to a close. I should have left the room sooner. But that was not the case for me, for the simple reason that I yearned to comprehend exactly what was going on and why was essential. For some reason, my dad gave me an expression like he could see something I couldn't. I don't know why, but I felt like something had moved inside of me. My chest was tight. For some reason, I just couldn't bring myself to leave. I clutched the blanket closer with my knuckles. Perhaps I ought to go. As if he were about to add something else, his lips slightly opened. However, after a brief interval, he merely nodded. As I made my way to the door, my heart racing, I got out of bed. You know where to find me if you change your mind. I heard him say it so softly I nearly believed it was an illusion right before I stepped out. With that, I turned around and never looked back. This, though, I knew, was far from done. At this time, no. Certain information carries more weight than others. In times of solitude, they lean against your breast, take up residence in the recesses of your thoughts, and speak softly to you. Plus, there's no turning back the clock on knowledge that was never supposed to be known. I really regret entering the room. It is my deepest regret that I answered the phone. To top it all off, I really wish my dad had been someone else. It all began with a noise. From the corner of the dresser, a gentle tremor. I hadn't intended to find anything. It came as a complete shock to me as I was deep in concentration while standing in my parents' bedroom. A name I didn't know flashed over my father's phone screen. I ought not to have glanced. Yes, I did. At that point, everything started to fall apart. The communication was brief. A woman whose name was Esme Stein and whose 5 words sent shivers down my spine. Shall we meet again tonight? You're missed. As I fixated on the television, my air became trapped in a spot halfway between my throat and lungs. It was chilly in my hands. My flesh crawled. It was as if I were perched precariously on the precipice of a precipice, with the earth caving in beneath my feet and no way to rescue myself. That was a name I'd never seen before, but I understood its significance. The meaning was clear to me. Silence was mine, not that evening. That won't work. As if it weren't devouring me, I held the secret close to my chest, pressing it between my ribs. However, I began to observe him in a new light. I witnessed his habit of checking his phone whenever he felt nobody was watching. Strangely, he departed from the residence without divulging his destination. His wedding ring kept vanishing and reappearing as if it were someone else's. I began to question whether my mom had known the whole time. Had she spent all those years turning a blind eye? Alternatively, was her vision identical to mine? Prior to my utterance of a word, Sarah Saloan had already detected an issue. "You've been quiet lately," he whispered to me one night as he watched me intently. Is that all right? I was going to inform him. I ought to inform someone. Unfortunately, the words were unable to escape the web of my other emotions. Well, I obviously exaggerated. Quite exhausted, really. He was unconvinced. His expression betrayed it. Yet he refrained from making a fuss. In a way, that only made matters worse. My father gave me very little eye contact for days. I had no idea whether he could tell that I was aware. Perhaps he, too, was gnawing on guilt, just as I was. Perhaps he was indifferent. My mom sprang to mind. It made her think of all the years she'd spent there, making dinner, doing laundry, and generally living a life that wasn't all it looked to be. I reflected on my own life. To me, love has always meant finding refuge from the dangers of the outside world. You were meant to trust the right person and reveal aspects of yourself to them that no one else could see when you found them. Now, though, I was uncertain. What did it imply for me if my father, the guy I had admired and who had taught me right from wrong, was capable of this? With Sarah Saloan? For the sake of passion? I stayed up late one night just staring up at the ceiling. Everything seems to be weighing me down. So much of my life had been devoted to attempting to comprehend relationships, improving myself, and proving my worth. Perhaps it wasn't me, though. Perhaps I had grown up in a home with shaky foundations. Perhaps I had always been influenced by my father's blunders. Perhaps it was time to finally cut them off. Everyone must face decision-making at some point in their lives. Either do nothing and act as if nothing has happened, or confront the reality, no matter how devastating it may be. The secrets my father kept from me weighed me down like a stone for days. I convinced myself that I could turn a blind eye, that it wasn't my concern, and that my father's private actions had no bearing on me. Still, it was untrue. Reason being, I felt its effects. My perception of him shifted as a result. I started to doubt everything after that. Plus, I could no longer deny it. One night, I discovered him in the living room, facing away from me, fixated on his phone as if he were anticipating something. Someone, maybe. To my surprise, my voice was more steady when I spoke to my father. His face betrayed him as he pivoted. Is that so? Before taking a deep breath, I paused. What was the point? His forehead wrinkled. Was anything worthwhile? I pursed my lips tightly. The falsehoods. The unknowns. A treacherous act. I thought he was going to deny it for a second as his jaw stiffened. Treat it as insignificant and move on. However, before the conversation even started, he touched his temple and exhaled as if he was sick of it. I cut in. I don't care what you saw. I saw more than enough. I read the messages. I witnessed your cunning maneuvers. Dad, I know. So please, just be honest with me. Why? He shook his head in frustration. No, CH Sarah Saloan, it's not that easy. A quick yes, and I shot back. Decision taken. You discarded a family, a wife, and a life that you had worked so hard to build. Also, why? For an interesting purpose? For something simple? A shadow fell over his features. My dear, you have no idea. I chuckled bitterly. I see your point. No, I am not. Reason being, I am completely unable of matching your level of competence. Never in my life would I betray someone after telling them I love them with all my heart. I noticed a fleeting expression on his face for the very first time, guilt, perhaps, or feel remorse. However, that was irrelevant. The reasons being that regret cannot undo deeds. The damage can't be repaired by regret. With his voice now quieter, he ran a hand through his hair. It was never my intention to do harm. With a lump in my throat, I swallowed. However, it was you who did it. Insufferably sluggish was the room. I had a feeling I wouldn't receive the response I desired. I had a feeling he would deny everything he did. And in that instant, I understood that I couldn't maintain the facade of things being all right. Ultimately, I stated that I require personal space. He became rigid. Can you explain that? As a result, I am unable to spend this time with you. The words hurt more than he had anticipated, and his expression shifted ever so slightly. But he remained silent. Perhaps he realized he couldn't say anything to change the situation. Consequently, I pivoted and departed, bidding farewell to the man I had previously placed my utmost trust in. Not all wounds heal. A few simply remain as scars, a constant reminder of what was taken. Sarah Saloan and I ended our relationship that very week. Not because I didn't value his company, I just had no idea who I was at the time. I had never paused to consider my own desires since I had been preoccupied with attempting to fit the mold of other people and comprehend love from the outside in. A little more time was required of me. The universe. an opportunity to begin over. I therefore prepared a suitcase. Finally, I have my own space. And I wasn't attempting to win over anybody except myself, a first for me. The union between my parents did not last. Maybe it had been in a state of disrepair for a long time, and I had simply failed to notice. Perhaps my father's affair was merely the decisive break in a chain reaction. My mom, though, remained composed. A scream eluded her. Without a second thought, she signed the paperwork, gathered her belongings, and bolted. Indeed, that may have been her most impactful move. Infidelity is often discussed as if it were a standalone act. The treachery, the unfulfilled vows. However, it is not all. Every aspect is transformed. Love, trust, and your own self-perception are all altered as a result. Love, I believed for a long time, was all about establishing one's worth. Having enough to offer, being desired enough. But I've come to understand that love is also about being able to let go, being aware of when to prioritize oneself. Perhaps it's about learning that although certain lessons are painful, they shape you into the person you are today. Therefore, allow me to pose a question to you. Where would you have started if you were me? Had you dared to face him? Have you considered keeping the secret? Would you have stuck with what you knew, or would you have abandoned it all? Please inform me in the space provided. Also, hit that like, share, and subscribe button if this story touched you. The problem with treachery is that it destroys more than simply trust. You start to doubt your own judgment. And fixing it is the most challenging aspect.